When the snow fell silent, the sky over Helena, Montana had turned the color of old pewter by the time Marcus Brennan guided his matched bay horses through the town square. Christmas Eve, 1885, and the wind carried the promise of a hard storm, the kind that could bury a man if he wasn't careful. "Papa, look, they've hung evergreen boughs on the mercantile." Emma pressed her mittened hands against the wagon's side panel, her breath fogging in the cold air. "Can we get peppermint sticks, please?" Marcus glanced at his daughter's face, flushed with excitement beneath her wool bonnet. 8 years old, and still believing in Christmas miracles. He checked his pocket watch nearly 4 o'clock. They should have left town an hour ago. "One stop," he said. "Then we head home." Inside Whitman's general store, coal oil lamps flickered against the gathering darkness. The proprietor wrapped Emma's peppermints in brown paper while Marcus settled the account for their supplies: flour, sugar, tinned goods enough to see them through January. He paid in cash. Crisp bills from his leather wallet. Money came easy now. Everything else came hard. "Storm's rolling in fast, Mr. Brennan," old Whitman said, counting the bills with practiced fingers. "Best get that little one home." "Much obliged for the concern." Marcus gathered the parcels. Emma clutched her peppermints like treasure. They loaded the wagon as the first snowflakes began to fall fat, lazy flakes that would turn mean soon enough. Marcus helped Emma onto the bench seat and tucked a buffalo robe around her legs. The horses stamped, eager to be moving. The road home stretched 12 miles north, winding through pine forests and open grazing land. Marcus had made the journey 1,000 times. Today it felt different. The wind picked up, driving snow horizontal across the wagon's path. Emma went quiet beside him, her earlier joy fading into the kind of silence that meant fear. "Tell me about Mama's Christmas cakes," Emma said suddenly, her voice small. Marcus's hands tightened on the reins. 3 years since Caroline had died. And still his daughter asked questions that had no good answers. She made them with cinnamon and molasses. Whole house smelled like heaven. "Will Mrs. Calloway make them this year?" "I expect so." "It's not the same, though." "No," Marcus said quietly. "It's not." The snow thickened. Within minutes, Marcus could barely see the horses' heads. The temperature dropped so fast he felt it through his wool coat. This was the kind of blizzard that killed cattle where they stood, that buried fence lines and erased roads. He urged the bays faster, but the going was treacherous. They rounded a bend where the road ran between 2 stands of lodgepole pine. Marcus's breath caught. There, 20 yards ahead, barely visible through the white curtain, a dark shape in the snow. A person. A woman. Collapsed in a drift. "Emma, stay in the wagon." Marcus was already climbing down, his boots sinking deep. The wind tried to push him back, but he fought forward, his heart hammering with a strange urgency he hadn't felt in years. She lay on her side, curled against the cold. No horse nearby, no wagon. Nothing but her body in a thin wool coat that was nowhere near enough for this weather. Marcus dropped to his knees beside her, pulled off his glove, pressed fingers to her throat. Pulse. Faint but there. Her eyelids fluttered. For one moment. She looked directly at him, eyes the color of storm clouds, full of something he couldn't name. Her lips, blue with cold, formed a single word. Angel. Then her eyes closed again. "Papa." Emma's voice, high with fear. "Is she dead?" "Not yet." Marcus shrugged out of his coat, wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. She was light, too light when he lifted her. Her head lolled against his chest and he could feel how cold she was, even through his wool vest. He carried her to the wagon, laid her as gently as he could on the flatbed among the supply crates. Emma stared, her face white. "Is she gonna die?" "Not if I can help it." Marcus yanked the buffalo robe from the bench, tucked it around the woman's still form. Then he climbed back to the driver's seat, took up the reins, and slapped leather. The horses lunged forward into the teeth of the storm. The 12 miles home became an eternity. Marcus drove blind, trusting the bays to know the road. One arm braced back to steady the woman behind him. Emma huddled close to his side, crying quietly. The wind screamed. Snow piled up so fast Marcus had to keep blinking to see anything at all. He didn't pray often anymore, hadn't since Caroline died, but he prayed now. For the horses to keep their footing. For the woman not to freeze before they reached shelter. For something, anything, to go right for once. When the lights of his house finally appeared through the snow, Marcus nearly wept with relief. He pulled the wagon up to the front porch and shouted. The door flew open. Mrs. Calloway stood silhouetted against the warm glow of the parlor, her face shocked. Sweet mercy, Mr. Brennan, get blankets and hot water. Now. Marcus lifted the woman again, carried her up the steps. She weighed nothing. Her breathing had gone shallow. Barely there. Inside. The house blazed with warmth. 2 ranch hands appeared from the kitchen, took one look, and hurried to help. Within minutes, they had the woman upstairs in the best guest room, laid out on the rope bed while Mrs. Calloway stripped off the frozen outer garments and wrapped her in quilts. Marcus stood in the doorway, unable to look away. In the lamplight, he could see her face properly for the first time young, maybe 30, with dark hair plastered wet against her cheeks. Her hands, emerging from the quilts, were rough with calluses. Working hands, not the hands of someone soft. Will she live? Emma whispered beside him, clutching his leg. Mrs. Calloway looked up from chafing the woman's wrists. I've seen men come back from worse, but it'll be touch and go till morning. Emma tugged Marcus's hand. Papa, is she an angel? She looks like one. Marcus studied the stranger's pale face. Something about her, some quality he couldn't name, had pulled him from the numbness he'd lived in for 3 years. Standing there watching her fight for breath, he felt something crack open in his chest. Purpose. The first real feeling since Caroline's death. I don't know what she is, he said quietly. But she's alive. That's what matters. Later, after Emma had finally agreed to go to bed, after the hands had returned to the bunkhouse, Marcus stood alone in the guest room doorway. Mrs. Calloway had gone to fetch more heated bricks wrapped in flannel. The woman's breathing had steadied, grown deeper. Color was returning to her lips. He should leave, should let her rest. But he found himself stepping closer, studying her face in the coal oil lamp's glow. Who was she? What had driven her out into a Christmas Eve blizzard with no horse? No supplies. Nothing but a coat too thin to save her life. Her eyes opened. For a heartbeat. They stared at each other. Where? Her voice was barely a whisper. You're safe. My house. I found you on the road. You. She blinked, trying to focus. You saved me. Couldn't leave you out there. She closed her eyes again, but not before he saw something flash across her face. Not just gratitude. Something deeper. Grief. Maybe. Or fear. Thank you. She breathed. Then sleep took her again. Marcus stood there a moment longer, then turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall and took a shuddering breath. For the first time in 3 years, he'd acted instead of just existing. He'd saved a life. And standing there in the silent house with snow beating against the windows, Marcus Brennan realized something that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. He didn't want her to leave. The stranger at the hearth, Christmas morning dawned cold and clear. The blizzard had passed in the night, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow. Grace woke slowly, her body aching like she'd been trampled by horses. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Then memory flooded back. The storm, the cold seeping into her bones, a man's face above her in the swirling white. She pushed herself upright, wincing. The room around her was finer than any she'd slept in for months. Wallpaper with tiny roses, a washstand with a porcelain pitcher and basin, windows curtained in blue damask. Through them, She could see endless white stretching to dark pines on the horizon. The door opened. An older woman entered carrying a breakfast tray, her gray hair pinned in a neat bun beneath a white cap. Awake. Thank the Lord. She set the tray on the bedside table. I'm Mrs. Calloway, housekeeper here. How are you feeling? Dear. Grace's throat was raw. Like I should be dead. Near enough to it when Mr. Brennan brought you in last evening. Thought we'd lose you twice before dawn. Mrs. Calloway poured water from the pitcher into a glass. Drink slowly now. The water hurt going down, but Grace drained the glass anyway. Mr. Brennan, he's the man who found me. Him and his daughter Emma. You gave them quite a fright. Mrs. Calloway studied her with kind but curious eyes. What's your name, child? Grace hesitated. Old fear rose in her throat, automatic as breathing. But these people had saved her life. She owed them something. Grace, she said. Not a lie. Just not the whole truth. Grace. Mrs. Calloway nodded. Pretty name. Where were you headed in that storm? Grace looked down at her hands, rough and calloused against the fine linen sheets. I was traveling. Lost my way. It was the story she'd rehearsed 100 times during her months of running, vague enough to be hard to disprove, true enough that she could say it without her voice shaking too badly. Mrs. Calloway's expression suggested she heard the gaps in the tale, but she didn't press. Well, you're safe here. Mr. Brennan's a good man. Quiet these days. Keeps to himself, but decent through and through. He won't turn you out while the roads are still impassable. How long will that be? Days. I'd wager, maybe longer. Storm like that doesn't clear quick. Mrs. Calloway moved toward the door. I'll fetch you something to wear. Your own things were near frozen solid. When she was gone, Grace stood on shaking legs and walked to the window. The land stretched white and silent under a pale blue sky. Beautiful. Peaceful. Nothing like the desperate flight that had brought her here. She pressed her palm against the cold glass and allowed herself one moment of truth. She was Grace Hartley, last surviving heir to the Double R Ranch, 3,000 acres her grandfather had homesteaded in 1852. 6 months ago, a man named Cord Vance had used forged documents to claim her deed was invalid. When she'd tried to fight, his men had made it clear she had two choices: leave or disappear permanently. So she'd run, and kept running, until a Christmas Eve blizzard had nearly killed her, and a stranger had pulled her from death's grip. The question was, how long could she stay before Vance's men found her again 2 hours later, wearing a borrowed calico dress that was slightly too large. Grace made her way downstairs. The house was even grander than she'd realized. Polished wood floors, oil paintings on the walls, furniture that probably cost more than most men made in a year. But it felt empty somehow, beautiful and cold, like a museum. Voices drew her toward the parlor. She paused in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. The man from last night sat in a leather armchair, a newspaper in his hands. In daylight, she could see him clearly, tall, probably 40, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and eyes that held the kind of sadness that never quite leaves. He wore a wool vest over a white shirt, his sleeves rolled to the elbows. Gentleman's clothes on a man who looked like he'd forgotten how to rest. A little girl sat at his feet, surrounded by wooden toys and a porcelain doll. She had his dark hair, but her face held more life than his bright, with the kind of joy only children can manage. Papa, listen. The girl was in the middle of some elaborate story when she spotted Grace. Her eyes went wide. Papa, she's awake. The man looked up. Their eyes met. And Grace felt something shift in the air between them, recognition. Maybe, though they'd never met before last night. The recognition of two people who knew what loss looked like. He stood quickly, folding the newspaper. Miss Grace, wasn't it you should be resting? I've rested enough? Grace stepped into the room, acutely aware that she was intruding on their Christmas morning. I wanted to thank you for saving my life. Couldn't leave you out there. He said it simply, like it was the only choice he could have made. I'm Marcus Brennan. This is my daughter, Emma. The girl bounced to her feet and ran over, staring up at Grace with unnerving directness. Are you an angel? I asked Papa last night, but he didn't know. Emma, Marcus started, but Grace cut him off with a surprised laugh. No, sweetheart. Just a woman who made some poor decisions about traveling in winter. But Papa saved you, Emma insisted. Like in the stories. That makes you special. Grace's throat tightened unexpectedly. She knelt so she was level with the child's eyes. Then I'm very lucky your papa found me, and very grateful. Emma studied her face with serious intensity. Do you have children? Emma, that's enough questions, Marcus said. No. The word came out harder than Grace intended. She softened it with a smile. No, I don't. But I always wanted them. Emma's face lit up. You can stay here then. We've got lots of room, and it's just me and Papa and Mrs. Calloway, and she says the house is too big for so few people, and I've been praying for Emma. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. Miss Grace was traveling somewhere. She has her own plans. Grace stood, brushing imaginary dust from the borrowed dress. The child's enthusiasm hurt in a way she hadn't expected. Your father's right. I don't want to impose. The roads won't be clear for days, Marcus said. His eyes met hers again, and she saw something there, not pity, but understanding. You'd be doing us a kindness if you'd stay through the storm. It's been a quiet Christmas. There was weight behind those words. Pain he wasn't saying. Grace recognized it because she carried the same kind herself. If you're certain I wouldn't be a burden, you'd be a guest, he said it with finality. Mrs. Calloway's preparing Christmas dinner. We'd be pleased if you'd join us. Dinner was venison roast and root vegetables, plum pudding with brandy sauce, coffee strong enough to strip paint. They ate in a dining room that could have seated 20, but held just the 4 of them Marcus at the head of. The long oak table, Emma chattering beside him, Grace across, and Mrs. Calloway bustling in and out with dishes. Grace tried not to stare at the wealth surrounding her. The silver candlesticks, the china plates hand-painted with delicate flowers, the crystal glasses that caught lamplight and threw it in rainbow fragments across the white tablecloth. This was what money looked like. Real money. The kind that built empires. And sitting across from her was a man who seemed to take none of it for granted, and none of it as comfort. Do you like Montana Territory, Miss Grace? Emma asked, demolishing her second helping of pudding. I grew up here, Grace said carefully. I've always loved it. What part? Marcus asked. His first real question, and it was a dangerous one. East of here. My grandfather. She paused, choosing words. He built things. With his hands and his will. What sort of things? Grace met his eyes, saw intelligence there, and curiosity, but not suspicion. Not yet. A life. A legacy. The kind of thing that's supposed to last. Something flickered in Marcus's expression recognition. Maybe, or sympathy. Nothing lasts the way we think it will. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither of them would explain. Emma broke the silence. Papa, can Miss Grace see Mama's conservatory? Marcus's face closed like a door slamming. It's cold out there, Emma. But she'd love it Mama grew roses and... Emma, no. The girl's face fell. Grace saw her own pain reflected there, the knowledge that some doors stayed locked, some wounds stayed open. After dinner, Emma dragged Grace to see her wooden menagerie, while Marcus retreated to his study. The girl arranged carved animals in elaborate scenes, narrating adventures with the unself-conscious creativity of childhood. Grace listened, responded, felt something in her chest loosen despite herself. When Emma yawned, Grace helped her gather the toys. You should sleep, sweetheart. Will you still be here tomorrow? Grace glanced toward the windows, where snow continued to fall in lazy spirals. I think so. The storm hasn't finished with us yet. Emma threw her arms around Grace's waist in a sudden, fierce hug. Good. I like you. You don't talk to me like I'm a baby. Grace's hands hovered, then settled gently on the child's shoulders. How long since she'd been hugged? How long since she'd let herself care about anyone? Too long. Much too long. When Emma finally went upstairs to bed, Grace found herself alone in the parlor. Marcus appeared in the doorway, 2 glasses of brandy in his hands. Peace offering, he said. My daughter can be persistent. She's wonderful. Grace accepted the glass. You're lucky. I know. He sat in the chair across from hers, studying her face in the firelight from the cast-iron stove. Can I ask you something? Her stomach tightened. You can ask. Are you running from the law? Grace almost laughed. No. I'm running from men who break it and call it business. His eyes sharpened. What happened? She took a long drink of brandy, felt it burn all the way down. How much to tell? How much could she risk? My family had land, she said finally. Good land. Someone wanted it more than we did. They used lawyers and forged papers, and when that didn't work, they used threats. I could have stayed and fought, but I would have lost, and maybe worse than lost. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Snow whispered against the windows. I understand running, he said quietly. I've been doing it myself for 3 years. From grief. From my daughter's needs. From life. Maybe. He gestured at the house around them. All this wealth, and I'm the poorest man I know. Grace looked at him, really looked, saw the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried weight that had nothing to do with physical burdens. What happened? And she asked. My wife died. Consumption. I was away on business railroad investments in Denver. By the time I got home, she was gone. He drained his brandy glass. Emma was 5. She needed her mother and got a ghost instead. A man who went through motions but couldn't feel anything. Until last night, he met her eyes. Until last night, the moment stretched between them, fragile and powerful. 2 broken people recognizing each other across the space of a parlor that felt suddenly very small. The storm will clear, Grace said softly. I should leave when it does. When should you? Marcus leaned forward. Or are you just running again? I don't have a choice. Everyone has choices. Sometimes they're all terrible, but we still have them. He stood, set his empty glass on the mantel. Stay through New Year's. At least, give yourself time to heal. To decide what comes next. Grace's hands shook slightly around her glass. Stay. The word was a temptation and a terror. Stay meant risk. Stay meant caring about these people, this sad, kind man and his bright, hungry daughter. Stay meant the possibility of Vance's men finding her and bringing violence to this peaceful house. But God, she was tired of running. I'll stay, she heard herself say. Through New Year's, if you're certain. Marcus smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less haunted. I'm certain. After he left, Grace sat alone by the dying fire and let herself admit the truth. She'd just made a mistake, maybe a catastrophic one, because she was already half in love with this broken family, and when they learned the truth about who she really was, they would hate her for it, the weight of what's unspoken. 3 days after the storm, Grace found herself in the kitchen before dawn, her hands buried in bread dough. The routine soothed her need. Fold, turn. Work she'd done 1,000 times in her grandfather's ranch house, before everything fell apart. Mrs. Calloway appeared in the doorway, lamplight catching the surprise on her face. Mercy, child, you don't need to. I can't just sit idle. Grace shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. My grandfather believed idleness was a sin. What did he do? Your grandfather. Grace's hands stilled for just a moment. He built things. A life from nothing. With his own hands and his will. Mrs. Calloway moved closer, studying Grace's work. Those are ranch hands. I've seen them before. Grace looked down at her calloused palms, the strength in her fingers. No hiding what a lifetime of work left behind. I grew up working. Nothing wrong with that. Mrs. Calloway began stoking the cast iron stove. Mr. Brennan could use someone around here who understands labor. He's got wealth, but he's forgotten what it means to actually live. How long has he been this way? Since Mrs. Caroline died. 3 years of watching him hollow out. Mrs. Calloway's voice softened. But something's different these past few days. He came down to breakfast yesterday humming. Haven't heard that man hum in 3 years. Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the stove. She focused on placing the loaves in the Dutch oven. Anything to avoid Mrs. Calloway's knowing eyes. The roads will clear soon, Grace said quietly. I should think about moving on. Should you? Mrs. Calloway echoed Marcus's words from Christmas night. Or are you just afraid to stay? Before Grace could answer, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Marcus appeared, already dressed for the day in wool trousers and a work shirt. He stopped when he saw Grace at the stove. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. She wiped flour from her hands onto the borrowed apron. I hope you don't mind. I don't mind. He moved closer, and she caught the scent of soap and leather. You know your way around a kitchen. My grandfather believed everyone should earn their keep. He taught me to cook, work cattle, mend fence. She met his eyes. Everything you need to know to survive out here? Survive, Marcus repeated. That's what you've been doing. Isn't it just surviving? The words cut too close to truth. Grace turned back to the stove, busying herself with checking the bread. We all survive however we can. Maybe, his voice was quiet, or maybe some of us just forget we're supposed to do more than that. Later that morning, Emma burst into the parlor where Grace was mending one of the girls' torn stockings. Miss Grace, come see Mama's garden. Grace looked up from the darning egg. Your father said, he's out with Clem checking the cattle. Please, nobody ever goes there anymore. And it's so sad and lonely. And I think Mama would want someone to see it. The plea in those young eyes was impossible to resist. Grace set aside her mending. Show me. Emma led her through the house to a glass-walled conservatory that jutted from the back. The moment Grace stepped inside, her breath caught. It should have been beautiful. The glass structure was elegant, clearly expensive. But everything inside was dead or dying. Roses gone brown on the vine, herb boxes filled with brittle stalks, a small lemon tree naked of leaves. Papa won't come in here, Emma said quietly. Her usual brightness dimmed. Not since Mama died. Mrs. Calloway says it hurts him too much. Grace moved between the raised beds, her practiced eye assessing. She knelt beside the rose bushes, gently scraped away dead leaves, examined the roots beneath. Emma, these aren't dead. But they're all brown and they're dormant. Grace looked up at the girl. Like people sometimes, waiting for spring, waiting for someone to believe in them again. She stood, brushed dirt from the borrowed dress. The garden was a perfect metaphor for the Brennan family beautiful structure. Forgotten life. Everything waiting for someone to care enough to bring it back. Could we fix it? Emma asked. Could we make it grow again? Grace saw hope flare in the child's face and felt her heart crack. She shouldn't promise anything. She'd be gone soon. Back to running. Back to hiding. But God help her. She couldn't bear to extinguish that hope. We could try, she heard herself say. It would take work, care, time. We have time. Emma grabbed her hand. You're staying through New Year's and then maybe longer, and we could… Emma! Grace squeezed the small hand gently. I can't stay forever. Why not? How to explain to a child that staying meant danger, that staying meant risking these people? She was already starting to care about… Sometimes grown-ups have complicated reasons for things, Grace said carefully. That's what adults always say when they don't want to tell the truth. Emma's voice held surprising steel. Papa does it all the time. Grace looked at this fierce, perceptive child and saw herself at that age before her parents died, before Vance stole everything, before running became survival, when she still believed people could be honest with each other. You're right, Grace said. We do. I'm sorry. Emma studied her face for a long moment, then seemed to accept the partial truth. Will you help me with the garden anyway? Even if it's just for a little while. Yes, Grace promised, knowing it was a mistake, even if it's just for a little while. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Grace found Marcus in his study. He sat behind a massive oak desk covered in maps and ledgers, a kerosene lamp casting shadows across his face. I saw the conservatory today, she said from the doorway. Emma showed me. His jaw tightened. She shouldn't have. The plants aren't dead. Marcus. They're dormant. They could be brought back. With attention. I know. He set down his pen, met her eyes. I can't go in there. Every time I try. I see Caroline planting those roses, laughing about something. And He stopped, shook his head. It's easier to leave it alone. Grace stepped into the room. Emma needs that garden. She needs to see that dead things can live again. That care matters. Is that what you believe? His voice was sharp. After everything that happened to you, you still believe care matters. I have to. The words came out raw, more honest than she'd intended. Because if I stop believing it, then the men who took everything from me win. They don't just get my land, they get my soul. Marcus stood, moved around the desk toward her, in the lamplight. His face was all shadows and sharp edges. Tell me what happened. Really happened. Grace's pulse quickened. This was the moment. Tell him everything or keep running with half-truths. She looked at this man who'd saved her life, who'd given her shelter, whose daughter called her special. A man hollowed out by grief who was just starting to remember how to feel. She owed him truth, even if it cost her everything. My name is Grace Hartley, she said. I owned the Double R Ranch, 3,000 acres east of here. My grandfather homesteaded it in 1852, built it from nothing. She wrapped her arms around herself. 6 months ago, a man named Cord Vance used forged documents to claim our deed was invalid. Said the land was never properly filed, that he had rights to it. That's illegal. Only if anyone enforces the law. Vance has money, connections. The county sheriff's in his pocket. Grace's voice hardened. When I tried to fight, his men made it clear I had two choices. Leave or be buried on land that used to be mine. Marcus's face had gone cold with anger. Not at her for her. So you ran. What else could I do? I'm alone. No family left. No money for lawyers who'd challenge Vance. I thought… She laughed bitterly. I thought I'd make it to Helena. Find work. Save enough to hire real help. Instead, I nearly froze to death in a Christmas blizzard. Why didn't you tell me this from the start? Because I've learned that the moment people know who I am, one of two things happens. Either they decide I'm too much trouble and turn me out, or they decide to help, and Vance's men make them regret it. She met his eyes. I couldn't risk bringing that kind of trouble to your door. Not after you saved my life. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. studying her face. Then he moved to a cabinet, pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, poured generously. "My wife used to say I hide behind money," he said, handing her a glass. "That I built this empire, railroad investments, land holdings, all of it because it was easier than actually feeling things." She was right. He took a long drink. "I've been running too, Grace, from grief, from my daughter's needs, from life itself, running in place, in this house, with all this wealth that means nothing. At least you have Emma." "Do I?" His voice cracked. "Half the time I look at her and see Caroline. The other half I see all the ways I'm failing her. She needs a parent who's present, not a ghost pretending to be a father." Grace set down her glass, moved closer. "You're here now. That's what matters. Because of you." He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You walked into this house 3 days ago and everything changed." Emma laughs again. Mrs. Calloway hums in the kitchen. "I came home early from the bank yesterday because I wanted to see you at dinner." He stopped, swallowed hard. "I'm falling in love with you, and I don't even know if that's your real name." The words hung between them like something fragile and dangerous. "It's my real name," Grace whispered. "Grace Hartley. Everything else I've told you is true too. I just didn't tell you all of it." "Then tell me now, all of it, because I can't—" His voice roughened. "I can't lose someone else I care about. Not again. So if you're going to run, if this is temporary, tell me now, before I fall any further." Grace looked at this man, wealthy, broken, brave enough to risk his heart again despite everything. Looked at the life he was offering, even if he hadn't said it out loud yet. Safety, family, a chance to stop running, and knew with absolute certainty that she was about to make the worst mistake of her life. Because she loved him too, loved him and Emma, and even this cold house that was starting to feel warm. Loved them enough that the thought of leaving made her chest ache. But Vance was still out there, and men like Vance didn't stop hunting until they got what they wanted. "I'm afraid," she said finally. "If I stay, if I let myself care, Vance's men will find me. And when they do, they'll hurt anyone who's helped me. I couldn't bear it if something happened to Emma because of me, or you." Marcus set down his glass and took her hands. His grip was warm, solid, real. "Then we'll face it together. You don't have to fight alone anymore. You don't understand what you're offering. I understand perfectly." His eyes held hers. "I'm offering you what you gave me. A reason to stop running. A reason to feel alive again. Whatever comes next, we handle it together. You, me, Emma, a family." Grace felt tears burn behind her eyes. "I haven't been part of a family in a long time." "Neither have I. Not really. Not since Caroline died." His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. "Stay. Grace. Not just through New Year's. Stay." It was madness. It was dangerous. It would end in heartbreak or worse. But God help her. She was tired of being alone. "I'll stay," she whispered. "For as long as I can." Marcus pulled her into his arms, and Grace let herself be held for the first time in months. Let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe running could stop, that maybe broken people could build something whole together. Outside. Snow began to fall again, softer this time, gentle as a promise. Neither of them saw the lone rider who'd passed through town that afternoon, asking the storekeeper about a woman traveling alone. Neither of them knew that Mrs. Henley, the town busybody, had mentioned seeing Marcus Brennan with a mysterious stranger at his estate. Neither of them knew that in a hotel room in Helena, a telegram was being drafted to a man named Cord Vance. But they would learn soon enough. For now, they held each other in the lamplight and pretended tomorrow wasn't coming. When the roads opened, The sun emerged on the sixth morning after Grace's arrival, turning the snow-covered landscape into a field of diamonds. Grace stood at the kitchen window watching Clem and two ranch hands shovel a path from the barn to the house, their breath steaming in the cold air. "Roads will be passable by tomorrow," Mrs. Calloway said, kneading dough at the work table. "Maybe day after." Grace's hands stilled on the coffee pot she'd been filling. Tomorrow. The word sat heavy in her chest. "That's good," she said, not meaning it. Mrs. Calloway gave her a knowing look. "Is it?" Before Grace could answer, Emma burst through the door in a flurry of wool coat and snow-dampened mittens. "Miss Grace, Papa says we can go to town this afternoon. Will you come with us, please?" Grace glanced at Mrs. Calloway, who nodded encouragement. Town. Public. Dangerous. But she'd promised to stay, and hiding in the house forever wasn't living. It was just a different kind of running. "I'll come," Grace said. Emma's whoop of joy made her smile despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Helena was alive with post-Christmas activity when they arrived 3 hours later. The buckboard wagon navigated streets packed with snow and busy with foot traffic. Grace kept her wool shawl pulled up around her face, but still felt exposed. Every stranger's glance made her pulse quicken. Marcus must have sensed her tension. He guided the horses to a hitching post outside Whitman's general store and touched her arm gently. "We'll be quick. Just supplies and then home." "I'm fine," Grace said, not quite truthfully. Inside the store, Emma dragged Grace toward bolts of fabric while Marcus spoke with old Whitman about feed prices. Grace ran her fingers over calico prints and wool flannel, letting Emma's chatter wash over her. "This one." Emma held up a length of blue gingham. "For a new dress for you." "Papa, can we—" Marcus looked up from his conversation. His eyes found Grace across the store, and something passed between them warm, private, full of unspoken promise. "Whatever she needs," he said. Grace started to protest, but Emma was already pulling down more fabric, planning an entire wardrobe. Whitman measured and cut while his wife wrapped purchases in brown paper. The normalcy of it shopping, planning, being part of a family made Grace's throat tight. Then she saw him. A man at the back of the store, rough-looking, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He was watching her with the kind of attention that made the hair on her neck rise. Grace turned away quickly, pulled her shawl tighter. "Emma, we should go. But we haven't looked at ribbons yet. Now." The sharpness in Grace's voice made the girl stop mid-sentence. Marcus appeared at her elbow, parcels in hand. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. The cold is getting to me." She forced a smile that felt like breaking glass. "I'd like to go home." He studied her face, saw through the lie, but nodded. "Emma, help me load the wagon." As they left the store, Grace glanced back. The scarred man was gone. Maybe she'd imagined the threat in his gaze. Maybe paranoia was making her see danger everywhere. Or maybe Vance's net was closing tighter than she'd thought. That evening, after Emma had been tucked into bed, Grace found herself in the conservatory with Marcus. They'd spent the past hour clearing dead leaves, assessing what could be saved. It felt right, working beside him in companionable silence, their hands occasionally brushing as they reached for the same tools. "She could have asked me about the dress fabric," Grace said, pruning dead branches from a rose bush. "I would have said no, it's too much." "Emma doesn't ask because she knows I'll give her what she wants." Marcus examined the lemon tree's bare branches. "Caroline used to say I was spoiling her." She was probably right. You're trying to make up for what you can't give her. A mother. Your full presence. Grace set down the pruning shears. "I understand that. But Emma doesn't need more things. Marcus. She needs you. Really you." He turned to face her, and in the lamplight, his expression was raw. "I know. I'm trying. These past days with you here, I've started to remember how to be present, how to laugh, How to want things beyond just getting through another day. Grace's heart hammered. Marcus, let me finish. He moved closer. When Caroline died, I thought the part of me that could love died too. That I'd spend the rest of my life going through motions providing for Emma but never really connecting. Then I found you in that snowstorm and everything changed. I'm not her. I don't want you to replace anyone. His hands came up to frame her face, gentle and certain. I want you, Grace Hartley, with your secrets and your strength and your calloused hands. The woman who understands work and loss and what it means to keep fighting even when everything's been taken. From you. You don't know everything about me. Then tell me. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Tell me everything. The parts you're afraid of. The parts you think will make me turn away. Tell me and let me decide if I'm brave enough to love you anyway. Grace closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten. How long since anyone had offered to carry her burdens with her? How long since she'd let herself be? Vulnerable enough to accept the Double R wasn't just a ranch, she said quietly. It was my grandfather's dream. He came west with nothing, no money, no connections, just determination. Built that place from bare ground. Taught me everything about the land, about cattle, about what it means to steward something bigger than yourself. She opened her eyes. When he died, he made me promise I'd keep it, that I wouldn't let anyone take it from us. But Vance took it anyway. I ran instead of fighting. I broke my promise. The words tasted like failure. My grandfather would be ashamed. Marcus's hands tightened on her face. Your grandfather would be proud you survived. Proud you were smart enough to know when fighting meant dying. His voice roughened. Don't you see, Grace, you didn't give up. You're regrouping. And now you're not alone anymore. Before she could respond, he kissed her, gentle at first, almost tentative, then deeper when she kissed him back. Grace felt 3 years of loneliness crack open inside her, felt herself leaning into his warmth, his strength, his unexpected softness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Not just through New Year's. Stay and let me help you get your ranch back. Let me stand with you. If Vance finds out I'm here, then we'll face him. Together. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. I have resources. Grace, money, lawyers, connections. Let me use them for something that matters. Grace wanted to say yes with every fiber of her being. Wanted to believe this man could help her reclaim what she'd lost. But the image of that scarred man in the store haunted her. I saw someone today, she admitted. In Whitman's, he was watching me. It might have been nothing. But Marcus's expression went cold. Did he approach you? No, he was just watching. Clem. Marcus turned toward the door and raised his voice. Clem. The foreman appeared within moments, as if he'd been waiting nearby. Boss, I need you to ride into town tomorrow, quiet-like. Ask around about strangers asking questions. Anyone looking for a woman traveling alone? Clem's weathered face showed no surprise. He'd clearly sensed something was brewing. Will do. Anything else? Post watches? Nothing obvious. But I want to know if anyone comes near the property who doesn't belong. Already done. Clem glanced at Grace, his expression kind. Miss Hartley, anything happens, you sing out. We take care of our own around here. After he left, Grace stared at Marcus. You told him, I trust Clem with my life, with Emma's life. That means I trust him with yours. Marcus took her hand. I meant what I said. You're not facing this alone anymore. Grace felt something give way inside her, the last wall between running and staying, between isolation and trust. I'm scared, she admitted. Not just of Vance. Of this. Of caring about you and Emma and then losing it all again. I'm scared too. Marcus pulled her close. But I'd rather be scared with you than numb without you. That's gotta count for something. They stood together in the conservatory, surrounded by dormant plants that would bloom again come spring. Through the glass walls, stars were emerging in a clearing sky. The storm had passed. The world was opening up again, and somewhere out there, danger was coming closer. Later that night, Grace sat at the small writing desk in her room, pen in hand. She'd started keeping a journal again, something she hadn't done since fleeing the ranch. The act of writing helped her think, helped her see patterns in the chaos. January 2nd, 1886. The roads are clearing. I could leave tomorrow. Keep running like I have for 6 months. But Marcus asked me to stay. Emma needs me to stay. And God help me. I want to stay more than I want safety. I saw a man in town today. Might be one of Vance's. Might be nothing. But I'm done pretending danger isn't real. If they're coming, then we'll face them. Marcus says together like it's a vow. Maybe it is. My grandfather used to say the land remembers those who love it. I wonder if people work the same way. If I love Marcus and Emma hard enough, long enough, will they remember me when this all falls apart? Because it will fall apart. Men like Vance don't stop until they get what they want. And what he wants is me silenced and the double R under his control. But maybe Marcus is right. Maybe I don't have to fight alone this time. She closed the journal and hid it in the bottom drawer of the dresser, beneath the borrowed nightgowns. Then she moved to the window and looked out at the snow-covered estate, at the dark line of trees beyond, at the vast Montana sky. She didn't see the rider who sat his horse at the tree line, watching the lit window. Didn't know that down in Helena. A telegram had been sent and received. Didn't know that Cord Vance was already booking passage on the morning train. But she would know soon. They all would, in his own room down the hall. Marcus sat at his desk writing a letter to his lawyer in Denver. The words came easily now. Request for investigation into land fraud. Cord Vance, R Ranch. Grace Hartley's rightful claim. He signed it, sealed it with wax from his lamp, and set it aside for the morning post. Then he went to check on Emma. Found her sleeping peacefully, her face soft in the moonlight streaming through the window. For the first time in 3 years, looking at his daughter didn't fill him with crushing guilt. It filled him with hope. Grace had done that, had walked into their lives and reminded them both what living meant. He'd be damned if he'd let anyone take that away. In the bunkhouse, Clem sat cleaning his rifle not because it needed cleaning, but because old habits died hard. He'd seen the way Miss Hartley had gone pale in town, the way she'd scanned faces like a hunted thing. He'd also seen the way the boss looked at her, like she was water after years in the desert. Trouble was coming. Clem could smell it the way he could smell a storm 3 days out. But trouble had come before, and the Brennan Ranch had weathered it. They'd weather this too. He hung the rifle back on its pegs and settled in for the night. But his gun belt stayed within reach. Just in case. The heart's quiet confession. January brought a cold snap that froze the water in the horse troughs solid. Overnight, Grace woke early each morning to help Clem and the hands break ice, haul fresh water from the well, check the cattle for frostbite. Marcus found her in the barn one morning, pitchfork in hand, mucking stalls with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. You don't have to do this, he said from the doorway. Grace looked up, strands of dark hair escaping her braid. Yes, I do. I'm not built for sitting idle. He crossed to where she worked, took the pitchfork from her hands. Then let me help. They worked in companionable silence, the rhythm of shared labor creating its own kind of intimacy. Grace was acutely aware of him beside her, the way his breath steamed in the cold air, the strength in his shoulders as he lifted hay, the occasional brush of his arm against hers. My grandfather taught me this, she said, breaking the silence. I was 7. He said if I was going to inherit the ranch someday, I needed to understand every part of it, from birthing calves to mending fence wire. She smiled at the memory. I complained for about a week. Then I realized he was treating me like his equal, not like a child to be coddled. After that, I loved it. Marcus leaned on the pitchfork, studying her face. What was his name? Joseph. Joseph Hartley. Grace's voice softened. Everyone called him Old Joe, though he hated it. Said it made him sound like a hound dog. Tell me about the ranch. The real details. What it looked like. And so she did. Standing in the warm barn with horses shifting in their stalls and morning light slanting through the cracks. In the wood. Grace painted him a picture. The ranch house her grandfather had built log by log. The creek that ran through the eastern pasture. Cold and clear even in August. The way sunset turned the mountains purple. The sound of cattle lowing at dusk. The particular smell of sage after rain. Marcus listened with complete attention, and Grace realized this was the first time she'd spoken about the double R, without grief choking her words. Here, with this man, she could remember without drowning in loss. It sounds beautiful, Marcus said quietly. It was home. Grace picked up the pitchfork again. That's what Vance stole, not just land home. Then we'll get it back. The certainty in his voice made her believe, just for a moment, that it might be possible. That afternoon, Emma discovered Grace in the library, surrounded by Marcus's collection of livestock journals and agricultural reports. What are you reading? Emma climbed onto the settee beside her, learning about winter feeding strategies for cattle. Grace closed the journal. Your father has quite the collection here. Papa likes books. Mama used to say he'd rather read about living than actually do it. Emma's face fell. I'm not supposed to remember things she said. Papa gets sad. Grace pulled the girl close. Your father gets sad because he loved her very much. Not because you remember. Memories are gifts, sweetheart. Don't hide them. Do you have someone you miss like that? Grace hesitated, then decided Emma deserved honesty. My parents died when I was young. Fever took them both within a week. After that, it was just me and my grandfather. He died 3 years ago. And then, she stopped, chose her words carefully. Then I was alone. But you're not alone now. Emma's small hand found hers. You have us. The simple statement broke something open in Grace's chest. She'd been so focused on the danger, on Vance, on protecting Marcus and Emma from her past, that she hadn't let herself fully acknowledge the truth. She had a family again. Fragile, new, built on hope rather than blood, but family nonetheless. No, Grace whispered. I'm not alone now. Emma snuggled closer. Miss Grace, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you love Papa? Grace's breath caught. 8 years old and already the girl saw everything. Emma, it's okay if you do. I want you to. Emma looked up with serious eyes. He smiles when you're around. Real smiles. Not the pretend ones. And he came home early 3 times this week just to have dinner with us. He never used to do that. Grace smoothed the girl's hair, her heart aching. Your father is a good man. That's not an answer. You're too smart for your own good. Mama used to say that too. Emma grinned. Then her face grew solemn again. Will you marry Papa, please? I've been praying for it every night since Christmas. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. How could she explain to a child that love wasn't always enough? That danger and past mistakes could destroy even the strongest connection, sweetheart. Life is more complicated than prayers sometimes. But you didn't say no? Hope blazed in Emma's face. That means maybe yes, before Grace could respond. Emma threw her arms around her neck in a fierce hug. I love you, Miss Grace. Even if you don't marry Papa, I just love you. Grace held the girl tight, breathing in the scent of soap and childhood innocence. I love you too. Emma. So much, and realized with a shock that it was true. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, this bright, wounded child had become hers in all the ways that mattered, which made the stakes of staying infinitely higher. That night, Marcus found Grace in the kitchen long after everyone else had gone to bed. She stood at the cast iron stove brewing tea in the battered tin pot, still wearing her borrowed calico dress, hair loose around her shoulders. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. Grace jumped slightly, then relaxed when she saw him. "Too much thinking?" "Dangerous habit." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "What are you thinking about?" "Emma asked me if I loved you today." Marcus went very still. "What did you tell her?" I didn't answer. Couldn't figure out how to explain that love isn't always simple. That sometimes caring about someone means leaving to keep them safe. "Grace." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Are you planning to leave?" "I don't know." The admission hurt. Clem asked around town yesterday. There was a man, the one I saw at Whitman's, asking the storekeeper about a woman traveling alone. Mrs. Henley told him she'd seen someone at your estate. Marcus's jaw tightened. When? 2 days ago? Clem found out this morning but didn't want to worry me. Grace pulled away, wrapped her arms around herself. Don't you see they're getting closer? And when they find me here, they'll see you and Emma as leverage, as people they can hurt to get what they want. Then we move first. My lawyer in Denver. Legal channels take time. Vance doesn't. Grace's voice shook. He'll come himself, or send men who don't care about the law. And I won't let you and Emma be caught in that storm. Marcus crossed the space between them in 2 strides, pulled her into his arms. She resisted for a heartbeat, then collapsed against his chest, finally letting herself take comfort. Listen to me, he said, his voice rough. I spent 3 years running from life, hiding behind money and routine and the excuse that I was protecting Emma by keeping my distance. But I wasn't protecting her, I was failing her. Just like I failed Caroline by being away when she needed me most. He pulled back enough to meet Grace's eyes. I'm not running anymore. And I'm not letting you run either. Whatever's coming, we face it together. That's what family does. Family. Grace's voice broke on the word. I haven't been part of a family since my grandfather died. I don't know if I remember how. Then we'll learn together. Marcus framed her face with his hands. Grace, I'm falling in love with you. No, I've already fallen. You walked into my house 2 weeks ago and reminded me what it means to be alive. To feel, to hope. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Don't ask me to give that up. Don't ask me to let you face danger alone when I have the means to help. What if I get you killed? The fear she'd been carrying for months poured out. What if Vance's men come and Emma loses another parent because I was selfish enough to stay? What if they don't? What if we fight and win? What if you get your ranch back and we build a life together, you, me, and Emma? His forehead touched hers. What if love is worth the risk? Grace closed her eyes, feeling tears slip free. I'm so tired of being afraid. Then stop being afraid alone. Be afraid with me. We'll be terrified together and fight anyway. A laugh escaped her. Watery but real. That's the worst inspirational speech I've ever heard. I'm new at this. Give me time to improve. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. Stay, Grace. Not because the roads are still bad or because Emma needs you, though she does. Stay because I need you. Because we need each other. Grace opened her eyes and looked at this man, wealthy, wounded, braver than he knew. A man willing to risk everything for a woman he'd known barely 2 weeks. A man who saw her strength and her scars and wanted both. I love you, she heard herself say. The words felt like stepping off a cliff. I love you and Emma and this life we're building, and it terrifies me. Marcus's smile was sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Good. Anything worth having should be terrifying. Then he kissed her slow and deep and full of promise. Grace kissed him back, pouring 3 years of loneliness and 6 months of running into this moment of choosing to stay, to fight, to love despite the cost. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. Will you help me with something tomorrow? What? The conservatory? I think it's time I stopped hiding from Caroline's memory. Time I learned to remember without drowning. He pulled back, met her eyes. Will you help me bring her garden back to life? Grace understood what he was really asking. Permission to move forward, blessing to love again. Acknowledgement that honoring the past didn't mean staying trapped in it. Yes, she said. We'll do it together. They stayed in the kitchen as the fire in the stove died to embers, talking in low voices about everything and nothing. Grace told him about teaching herself to read her grandfather's ledgers at 10. Marcus told her about the first time Emma said "Papa" after months of silence following Caroline's death. They shared fears and hopes and the small, mundane details that built intimacy stronger than passion. Dawn was breaking when they finally went upstairs, parting at Grace's door with one last kiss that held both promise and restraint. In her room, Grace lit the coal oil lamp and pulled out her journal. January 8th, 1886. I told him I loved him. Said the words out loud and didn't take them back. He wants to help me fight for the ranch. Believes we can win. And God help me, when he says it. I almost believe too. Clem confirmed Vance's men are asking questions. They'll find me soon, Days. Maybe a week if we're lucky. Part of me wants to run. Protect Marcus and Emma by disappearing. But he's right. Running is just another way of giving up. Tomorrow we work on Caroline's garden together. He's ready to remember without drowning. I wonder if I am too. If I can honor my grandfather's memory by fighting for the ranch instead of fleeing from the fight. Emma asked if I love her father. I didn't answer her, but I told him. And he said the words back. We're building something, Marcus, Emma, and me. Something fragile and fierce and worth defending. Let Vance come. Let his men try. We'll be ready. We'll face it together. She closed the journal and hid it away, then moved to the window. The sun was rising over snow-covered fields, painting everything gold and pink. Beautiful and cold and full of possibility. In the distance, she could see Clem and the hands beginning morning chores. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. Life continuing. Steady and sure. Grace pressed her palm against the cold glass and made herself a promise. Whatever came next, legal battles or violence, victory or loss, she wouldn't run again. She'd found her family, she'd found her home, and she'd fight like hell to keep it. Down the hall, Marcus stood at his own window, watching the same sunrise. He'd already made his decision. Today he'd send another telegram to his lawyer. Today he'd ride to see Marshal Tom Brenner and explain the situation. Today he'd start building the legal and social fortress that would protect Grace when Vance came. Because Vance would come. Men like that always did. But Marcus had resources, connections, money that could hire the best lawyers in the territory. And more importantly, he had something to fight for now. Someone to fight for. He touched his fingertips to his lips, still feeling Grace's kiss. Then he turned from the window and went to wake Emma. Time to stop hiding from life. Time to start living it. In town, in a room at the Helena Hotel. A scarred man named Royce sat writing a report. The woman from the wanted sketch, Grace Hartley, was definitely at the Brennan estate. The local busybody had confirmed it. The storekeeper, too. After some persuasion, he sealed the letter and took it downstairs to be posted on the morning stage. His employer would be pleased. And by week's end, Cord Vance would be here to collect what he considered his "when the past finds you." Grace woke to the sound of hoofbeats fast, urgent. Too early for normal ranch business. She was at the window before she was fully conscious, pulling back the lace curtain to see Clem riding hard toward the house. His horse lathered despite the cold. Something was wrong. She dressed quickly, her hands shaking as she fastened the buttons on her borrowed wool dress. By the time she reached the stairs, Marcus was already in the foyer pulling on his coat, his face grim. "Stay with Emma," he said when he saw her. "What's happening?" "I don't know yet. But Clem doesn't ride like that unless—" He stopped as pounding came at the front door. Marcus yanked it open. Clem stood on the porch, breath coming hard. "Boss, we got company coming. Marshal Brenner just rode in the back. Way says there's a man with legal papers and a county sheriff heading. This way. They'll be here within the hour." Grace felt the floor tilt beneath her. Vance. Not Vance himself, but his people. Clem looked at her with something like pity. "They've got a warrant. Miss Hartley. For trespassing and theft." "That's insane. Those charges are fabricated." "I know that, ma'am. But they've got the county sheriff backing them. And he's got the paperwork signed by Judge Harrison down in Silverbow County." Clem's jaw tightened. "Vance's pocket, Judge." Marcus's hand found Grace's, squeezed hard. "Where's Marshal Brenner now?" "Kitchen, waiting. Says he wanted to warn you first. Give Miss Hartley a chance to—" Clem trailed off. Looked uncomfortable. "To run," Grace finished. Her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Tom wouldn't do that," Marcus said sharply. "He's a good man. Good men can't always stop bad laws." Grace pulled her hand free, wrapped her arms around herself. She'd known this was coming, had felt it approaching like a storm, but knowing didn't make it easier. "I should go. Now. Before they arrive. If I'm not here. They can't arrest me. They can't use me against you and Emma." "No." Marcus's voice was flat. "Final. We talked about this. We fight together. Marcus—" "No." He turned to Clem. "Get the hands ready. I want witnesses to whatever happens here. And send someone to town for my lawyer, Silas Grant. Tell him I'll pay triple his usual rate if he can be here within 2 hours." Clem nodded and left. Marcus turned to Grace, pulled her into his arms. She let herself lean against him for just a moment, drawing strength. "They'll take me," she said against his chest. "Even if your lawyer comes, even if we fight Vance has a tame sheriff and fabricated charges, they'll haul me to Silverbow County and I'll disappear into some jail cell until Vance decides what to do. With me. Not if I have anything to say about it." Marcus pulled back, his eyes fierce. "Go wake Emma. Keep her upstairs, whatever happens. I don't want her seeing this." Grace wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle this alone. But Emma's face flashed in her mind, that bright, hopeful child who'd already lost so much. The girl couldn't watch another person she loved being dragged away. She went upstairs and woke Emma gently. The girl sensed immediately that something was wrong. "Miss Grace, what's happening?" "Some people are coming to talk to your father and me. I need you to stay up here with Mrs. Calloway." "All right." "What people?" Emma's voice rose. "Are they the bad men? The ones who took your ranch?" Grace's throat closed. She knelt beside the bed, took Emma's small hands in hers. "Yes, but your father and I are going to handle it. You don't need to worry." "But what if they take you away?" Tears were already forming in Emma's eyes. "Papa said you'd stay. You promised—" "I know, sweetheart, I know." Grace pulled the girl close, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the feel of small arms around her neck. But sometimes grown-ups have to face hard things. And when we do, we need the people we love to be brave for us. Can you be brave? Emma nodded against her shoulder, but her grip only tightened. Mrs. Calloway appeared in the doorway, her face worried but composed. "Come now, Miss Emma. Let's get you dressed and I'll make those cinnamon cakes you love." "I don't want cakes. I want Miss Grace to stay." "I'll be here," Grace promised, praying it was true. "I'll be right downstairs." It took both of them to coax Emma to let go. When Grace finally made it back to the first floor, she found Marcus in his study with Marshal Tom Brenner, Tom was a big man in his 50s, with a marshal's star pinned to his sheepskin coat and honest eyes that looked troubled. He stood when Grace entered. "Miss Hartley, I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. What can you tell us?" "Tom," Marcus asked. Tom pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "This is a copy of the warrant. Judge Harrison issued it 3 days ago, based on a complaint filed by Cord Vance, claiming that Grace Hartley unlawfully occupied his property, stole livestock and equipment, and fled before authorities could question her." "It's all lies," Grace said. "Vance forged documents to steal my ranch." "I believe you, ma'am, but belief doesn't stop the law." Tom's expression was pained. "Sheriff Dawes is riding with 2 of Vance's men. They're calling themselves deputies, but I'd wager they're hired guns. They'll be here soon to execute this warrant." "Can you stop them?" Marcus asked. "Not legally. Dawes has jurisdiction. Silverbow County Sheriff trumps Helena Town Marshal on territorial matters." Tom looked at Grace. "But I can make sure they follow proper procedure. No rough handling, everything by the book. And I can escort you to Silverbow myself. Make sure you get there safe." That's something. At least, Grace heard her own voice, distant and steady, like someone else was speaking. "When do we leave?" "Grace," Marcus started. "We don't have a choice. Marcus, if I resist, they can add more charges, make things worse." She turned to Tom. "How long until your lawyer can arrange a hearing?" "Days, maybe a week." Tom's face was grim. "I won't lie to you, Miss Hartley. Judge Harrison is Vance's man. Even with the best lawyer in the territory, this won't be a fair fight. But it'll be a fight." Grace lifted her chin. "That's more than I've had for 6 months." The sound of multiple horses approaching silenced them all. Tom moved to the window, peered out. "They're here." Grace's hands shook. She clasped them together, willing herself calm. Marcus crossed to her, took her face in his hands. "I will get you out of this," he said. "Whatever it takes, whatever it costs. Take care of Emma. That's what matters. You matter." His voice cracked. "You matter to me, to her. Don't give up. Grace, promise me." Before she could answer, pounding came at the front door, authoritative, demanding. The sound of men who expected obedience. Marcus held her gaze one moment longer, then went to answer. Sheriff Dawes was a thick-bodied man with small eyes and the self-important air of someone who enjoyed wielding power. Behind him stood 2 men, who made no pretense of being anything but hired muscle. One was the scarred man Grace had seen in Whitman's store. "Marcus Brennan." Dawes's voice was loud, meant to carry. "I'm Sheriff Dawes, Silverbow County. I'm here to execute a warrant for the arrest of Grace Hartley." "But on what charges?" Marcus's voice was cold steel. "Trespassing, theft, destruction of property." Dawes pulled out the warrant, unfolded it with theatrical precision. "Issued by Judge Harrison. Legal and binding. Those charges are false." Marcus didn't move from the doorway. "Miss Hartley is the rightful owner of the Double R Ranch. Cord Vance used forged documents. That's between her and the judge, right now. I'm here to bring her in." Dawes tried to step forward. Marcus blocked him. "She's not going anywhere without representation. I've sent for her lawyer. Law doesn't require a lawyer to execute a warrant." Dawes's voice hardened. "Now step aside, Mr. Brennan, or I'll add obstruction to the charges." Marshal Tom appeared beside Marcus. "Sheriff Dawes, Tom Brenner, Helena Town Marshal. I'll be escorting Miss Hartley to ensure proper procedure is followed." Dawes's eyes narrowed. "This is county business. This is a territorial citizen's rights. I'm making sure they're respected." Tom's tone allowed no argument. From inside the house, Grace appeared. She'd put on her coat, pinned her hat in place. Her face was pale but composed. Behind her, Mrs. Calloway stood with tears running silently down her cheeks. "I'm Grace Hartley," she said clearly. "I'll come peacefully. There's no need for threats." The scarred man smirked. "Smart woman." "Shut up, Royce," Tom snapped. Then to Grace. "Do you understand the charges against you?" "I understand they're fabricated. But I also understand the warrant is legal, even if the charges aren't." Grace looked at Marcus, tried to memorize his face. "I'm ready." "No." Emma's voice rang out from the stairs. She stood halfway down, still in her nightgown, her face streaked with tears. "You can't take her. Papa, don't let them. Emma, go back upstairs." Marcus started. "She's part of our family." Emma was sobbing now. "You can't just take people's family away." The raw pain in the child's voice seemed to affect even Dawes. His expression flickered with something that might have been discomfort. But the scarred man Royce just laughed. "That's real touching, but the lady's a criminal. Little girl. Criminals go to jail." Grace descended the stairs, went to Emma, knelt beside her. "Listen to me, sweetheart. I need you to be brave." "Can you do that? Can you be brave for me?" "I don't want to be brave. I want you to stay." Emma threw her arms around Grace's neck. Grace held her tight, feeling her own tears threaten. Over Emma's shoulder, she saw Marcus's stricken face, saw Clem and the ranch hands gathered in the doorway behind the lawman, silent witnesses. "I'll come back," Grace whispered to Emma. "I promise. Your papa will make sure of it." She stood, gently detaching the child's arms. Mrs. Calloway hurried forward to take Emma, who struggled and cried. The sound was knife in Grace's chest. Dawes pulled iron shackles from his belt. "Need to restrain you, Miss Hartley. Protocol." That's not necessary," Tom protested. "It's the law." Dawes reached for Grace's wrists. Marcus moved faster than Grace had ever seen him move. He stepped between them, his hand catching Dawes's wrist. "You put those on her, and I'll make it my life's work to destroy your career. I know the territorial governor personally. I fund 3 newspapers, and I have enough money to bury you in lawsuits until you're old and gray." The two men locked eyes. The moment stretched, tense and dangerous. Finally, Dawes backed down. He lowered the shackles. "Fine. But she rides in the wagon with Royce. Any attempt to flee and the restraints go on." "I won't flee," Grace said quietly. She looked at Marcus. "I'll see you at the hearing. Thank you for everything." "Grace." His voice broke on her name. "Take care of Emma." She stepped past him, past Tom, out onto the porch into the cold morning air. The wagon waited, rough-built and uncomfortable. Royce climbed up beside her, his presence oppressive. Sheriff Dawes mounted his horse. Tom mounted his own. As they began to move, Grace looked back. Marcus stood on the porch, one arm around Emma, who was still crying. Mrs. Calloway and Clem flanked them. The house that had been her sanctuary for 2 weeks looked suddenly small, fragile, already part of the past. She forced herself to turn forward, to face whatever came next, but she carried with her the memory of Marcus's voice. "Whatever it takes, whatever it costs," and her own silent vow, "I will come back. I will fight. And I will win." The wagon rolled down the snow-packed drive, carrying her away from the first home she'd known in 6 months. Away from the man she loved. Away from the child who'd called her family. But not away from hope. Not yet. Beside her, Royce leaned close. "Boss is gonna be real pleased we found you. Real pleased." Grace didn't answer. She kept her eyes forward, her spine straight, her hands steady in her lap. She'd run before, hidden before, lost before. But this time, she had something worth fighting for. This time, she had people fighting with her, and that made all the difference. Before the dawn breaks, the Silver Bow County Jail was a stone building that smelled of damp and despair. Grace sat on the narrow cot in her cell, a thin wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching weak winter sunlight filter through the barred window high above. 3 days. She'd been here 3 days, and the walls seemed to close in tighter with each passing hour. The cell next to hers held a drunk cowhand who'd sobered up and been released that morning. Now she was alone with the sound of her own breathing and the distant clank of iron doors. No word from Marcus. No word from his lawyer. No hearing scheduled. Just silence and the creeping certainty that Vance had won after all. The door at the end of the corridor opened. Grace's head snapped up, hope flaring, but it was just Deputy Cole bringing her dinner. Beans and hardtack on a tin plate. Water in a chipped ceramic cup. "Any news?" Grace asked, as she had every meal. "No, ma'am." Cole's face was apologetic. He was young, maybe 20, and clearly uncomfortable with having a woman in his jail. "Sheriff says the judge will see you when he's ready." "And when will that be?" "I don't know, ma'am. I'm sorry." After he left, Grace stared at the food without eating. Her stomach had been in knots since they'd locked the cell door. Every sound made her jump. Was it Vance coming his men? Or worse? Was it Marcus being turned away, told he couldn't see her? She set the plate aside and pulled out the only possession they'd let her. Keep her grandfather's pocket watch. Gold case worn smooth by years of handling. The inscription inside barely legible time is the measure of our choices. Choose wisely. J.H. Joseph Hartley's voice echoed in her memory. When things get hard. Grace girl. You got 2 choices. Stand or run. Running's easier. But standing's what separates the strong from the scared. I tried to stand. Grandfather. She whispered to the empty cell. I did, but they were stronger. And for the first time since her arrest, she let herself cry. Silent tears that tracked down her cheeks and soaked into the rough wool blanket. She cried for her lost ranch, for her dead grandfather, for Marcus and Emma who she'd dragged into this mess. She cried for the future she'd glimpsed for 2 beautiful weeks, a future of family and belonging and home. All of it gone because she'd been foolish enough to think she could stop running. Evening came. The jail grew colder. Grace paced her cell. 5 steps one way, 5 steps back. The pocket watch ticked steadily in her palm, marking time that felt both endless and running out. Footsteps in the corridor. Multiple sets. Purposeful. Grace's pulse spiked. A man appeared at her cell door. Tall. Well-dressed in a wool coat with a beaver fur collar. Silver-streaked hair slicked back with pomade. His eyes were cold and calculating as they swept over her. Miss Hartley. At last we meet properly. His voice was smooth, cultured, utterly devoid of warmth. I'm Cord Vance. Grace forced herself to stand straight, meet his gaze. I have nothing to say to you. Oh, but I have things to say to you. Vance nodded to Deputy Cole, who reluctantly unlocked the cell door. Vance stepped inside, and Grace's skin crawled with the urge to back away. She held her ground. You've caused me considerable trouble, Miss Hartley. 6 months of searching, hiring men to track you, legal fees to establish my claim. He circled her slowly, like a predator assessing prey. All for a ranch you couldn't maintain anyway. A woman alone, thinking she could run 3,000 acres your grandfather might have managed. But he laughed. You were failing before I ever filed my claim. That's a lie. Grace's voice shook with anger. The double R was profitable. The books were clear. Were they? Vance stopped in front of her. I have documents showing mounting debts. Unpaid taxes. Seems your grandfather wasn't quite the businessman everyone thought. Forged documents. Like everything else you filed. Vance's smile didn't reach his eyes. Prove it. Oh wait, you can't. Because you're in jail. And I have Judge Harrison signing whatever I need. He leaned closer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign over any remaining claim to the double R. In exchange, I'll drop the charges and you walk free. Never. Think about it. Miss Hartley. What's the alternative? Years in territorial prison. Even if you fight and somehow win, and you won't, you'll be destitute, broken. I'll make sure of that. His voice dropped. But if you sign, you get to walk away. Start over somewhere else. Maybe even keep that life you were building with Marcus Brennan and his daughter. Grace's blood went cold. You leave them out of this. Oh, I plan to. As long as you cooperate. Vance straightened his coat. But if you continue to be difficult, well, accidents happen. Wealthy men make enemies. Children can be so fragile. The threat hung in the air, poisonous and clear. You wouldn't dare. But even as Grace said it, she knew she was wrong. Men like Vance dared anything. Wouldn't I? Vance moved to the cell door. Paused. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Sign the papers, or I'll make sure everyone you care about suffers for your stubbornness. He smiled. Sweet dreams, Miss Hartley. After he left, Grace collapsed onto the cot, her entire body shaking. This was the nightmare she'd feared since Christmas Eve, Vance using Marcus and Emma against her. She could endure jail, could even endure losing the ranch forever. But she couldn't bear the thought of harm coming to them because of her. Maybe signing was the only way to keep them safe. Maybe some fights were meant to be lost. She pressed her face into her hands and felt the last of her hope crumble. Dawn light was creeping through the high window when footsteps approached again. Grace didn't look up. She'd spent the night wrestling with impossible choices and losing every time. Grace. Her head snapped up. Marcus stood outside her cell, Marshal Tom beside him. Marcus's face was haggard. He clearly hadn't slept either, but his eyes blazed with determination. Marcus. She was at the bars before she knew she was moving. How did you? Tom pulled strings to get me in early. Marcus reached through the bars, took her hands. His touch was warm, real, anchoring. I'm sorry it took 3 days. Vance had Judge Harrison blocking everything, no hearings. No bail, no visitors, but Tom found a federal judge willing to overrule him. There's a hearing scheduled for this afternoon. It won't matter. Grace's voice was hollow. Vance came last night. He wants me to sign over the ranch in exchange for dropping the charges. If I don't... She couldn't finish. If you don't, he'll come after Emma and me. Marcus's jaw tightened. He already tried. 2 men showed up at the house yesterday asking questions about Emma's routines. Clem ran them off. Grace felt her worst fears confirmed. Then I have to sign. I can't risk... No. Marcus's grip on her hands tightened. You're not giving up. Not now. I have to protect you. And I have to protect you. His voice rose, then softened. Grace, listen to me. Emma is safe. I've sent her to Denver with Mrs. Calloway and 3 guards. She's staying with my business partner until this is settled. Vance can't touch her. But I'm staying right here, fighting for you, for us. He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. This is your grandfather's original deed. The real one, verified by 3 different land offices. My lawyer has testimony from the county clerk in Virginia City saying Vance's documents are forgeries. The clerk finally broke when we offered him immunity. Marcus's eyes blazed. We have a case. Grace. A real one. The federal judge agreed to hear it because there's evidence of fraud across state lines. That puts it under federal jurisdiction. Beyond Harrison's reach. Hope stirred in Grace's chest, fragile as a candle flame. Are you certain? I've spent 3 days and a small fortune making certain we're not fighting alone anymore. Half the town knows what Vance tried to do. Threatening a child crosses lines. Even his bought men won't. Defend. Marcus pressed his forehead against the bars between them. Don't give up now. Please. Not when we're this close. I'm so tired of fighting. Then let me fight with you. Let Tom fight. Let Clem in the hands and everyone who sees Vance for what he is. He kissed her knuckles through the bars. You told Emma to be brave. Now it's your turn. Tears burned in Grace's eyes. What if we lose, then we lose together? But Grace, we might win. And isn't that worth the risk? Marshal Tom cleared his throat. Miss Hartley, there's something else you should know. 3 other ranchers came forward yesterday, all with similar stories about Vance using forged documents to steal their land. They're willing to testify. This isn't just about the double R anymore. It's about stopping a pattern of fraud that's been happening for years. Grace looked between the 2 men, Marcus exhausted but fierce, Tom steady and determined. Then she looked down at her grandfather's pocket watch, still clutched in her hand. Time is the measure of our choices. She'd chosen to run for 6 months, chosen fear over fight, and it had nearly cost her everything. Time to choose differently. All right. Grace's voice grew stronger. Tell me what I need to do. Marcus's smile was sunrise breaking through storm. First, you refuse to sign anything Vance puts in front of you. Second, you testify this afternoon, tell the truth about everything. Third, he reached through the bars and framed her face with his hands. You trust that love is stronger than fear. That family fights for each other. That we're going to win this because justice and truth are on our side. That's a lot of trust. You trusted me enough to stay instead of running. Trust me now to help you fight. Grace closed her eyes, leaned into his touch. In the cold jail cell with bars between them and a battle ahead, she felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, would probably always be there, but it no longer controlled her. She'd found her family, found her home, found her courage, and she'd be damned if she'd let Vance take any of it without a fight. Okay, she said, opening her eyes. Let's go to war. 2 hours later, Deputy Cole brought a man in an expensive suit to her cell. Miss Hartley, I'm Martin Cross, Mr. Vance's attorney. I have papers for you to sign. No. Cross blinked. I'm sorry, I said no. I won't sign anything. Grace stood from the cot, moved to the bars. Tell Mr. Vance I'll see him in court, and tell him if he or his men come near Marcus Brennan or his daughter again, I'll add witness intimidation and threats against a child to his list of crimes. Cross's professional smile faltered. Miss Hartley, I don't think you understand the position you're in. I understand perfectly. I'm done running, done hiding, done letting bullies win because they have money and connections. Grace's voice rang with newfound steel. Now get out. I have a hearing to prepare for. After Cross left, sputtering threats, Grace sat back down on the cot. Her hands were shaking, but her heart felt steady for the first time in days. She pulled out her grandfather's watch one more time, traced the inscription with her thumb. I'm choosing to stand, grandfather, she whispered. Watch me. The watch ticked steadily, marking time toward the afternoon hearing, toward battle, toward whatever came next. Grace Hartley had stopped running. Now she was ready to fight. And with Marcus beside her, with truth on her side, with a community rallied in defense of justice, maybe, just maybe, she could win. The door at the end of the corridor opened again. Tom and Marcus appeared with a woman Grace didn't recognize, sharp-eyed, carrying a leather satchel. Miss Hartley, Tom said. This is Catherine Wells, federal prosecutor. She'd like to discuss your testimony. Grace stood, squared her shoulders, met the woman's assessing gaze. I'm ready, she said. Let's bring Cord Vance down. When Justice Speaks, the federal courthouse in Helena was packed. Grace had expected a small hearing, a judge, lawyers, maybe a few witnesses. Instead, she walked into a room filled with ranchers, townspeople, merchants, even the territorial newspaper editor with his notepad and pencil. Word had spread. This wasn't just about one woman's stolen ranch anymore. This was about whether men like Cord Vance could continue stealing with impunity. Grace walked down the center aisle between rows of oak benches, acutely aware of every eye on her. She wore the blue gingham dress Marcus had bought her that day in town, the one Emma had chosen, and her hair was pinned simply at the nape of her neck. No pretense, no armor, just herself. Marcus sat in the front row, dressed in a dark suit, his eyes following her every step. When she passed, he reached out and squeezed her hand once. The brief touch carried weight. "I'm here. We're together. You can do this." Catherine Wells, the federal prosecutor, was already at the plaintiff's table. She was a formidable woman in her 40s, one of the few female attorneys in the territory, with a reputation for taking cases others considered unwinnable. "Ready?" she asked as Grace sat. Grace glanced across the aisle. Cord Vance sat with his attorney, Martin Cross. Perfectly composed in a tailored wool suit, he looked like what he pretended to be a respectable businessman. But Grace saw the coldness in his eyes, the slight smirk playing at his lips. He thought he'd already won. "I'm ready," Grace said. Federal Judge Elizabeth Morrison entered, a severe woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. The bailiff called the court to order. "We're here to address allegations of land fraud and false imprisonment," Judge Morrison said, settling into her chair behind the bench. "This is a preliminary hearing to determine if there's sufficient cause for a full trial. Miss Wells, you may proceed." Catherine Wells stood, her voice clear and carrying. "Your Honor, we will demonstrate that Cord Vance engaged in systematic fraud to steal the Double R Ranch from its rightful owner, Grace Hartley. Furthermore, he used his influence with county officials to bring false charges against Miss Hartley in an attempt to silence her legal claims." "Those are serious allegations," Judge Morrison said. "Yes, Your Honor, and we have serious evidence." Wells nodded to her assistant, who brought forward a stack of documents. Miss Hartley's grandfather, Joseph Hartley, filed his homestead claim in 1852. Here's the original deed, verified by 3 separate land offices. In contrast, the documents Mr. Vance used to claim the property are dated inconsistently, contain forged signatures, and show signs of recent creation despite purporting to be from 1851. Martin Cross stood. "Your Honor, those documents were examined and approved by Judge Harrison." "Judge Harrison, who happens to be Mr. Vance's cousin by marriage," Wells interrupted, "and who has a financial stake in at least 2 of Mr. Vance's land acquisitions. Hardly an impartial arbiter." Murmurs ran through the courtroom. Judge Morrison's gavel came down sharply. "Miss Wells, do you have proof of Judge Harrison's conflict of interest?" "We do, Your Honor." Wells produced more papers. Bank records showing payments from Vance Holdings to Harrison Properties, correspondence between the 2 men discussing land deals, and testimony from a county clerk willing to admit he was pressured to certify Vance's fraudulent documents. Vance's smirk was gone. His attorney whispered urgently in his ear. Judge Morrison studied the documents for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she looked up. "I want to hear from Miss Hartley herself." "Miss Hartley, please approach the witness stand." Grace's legs felt unsteady as she stood, but she kept her chin high. The bailiff swore her in on a worn leather Bible. She sat in the witness chair, her hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. Catherine Wells approached. "Miss Hartley, please tell the court about your family's history with the Double R Ranch." Grace took a breath and began. She told them about her grandfather arriving in Montana territory with nothing but determination and a wagon full of supplies, about building the ranch from bare ground, surviving harsh winters and cattle rustlers and drought, about her parents dying of fever when she was 12, leaving her alone with her grandfather, about learning to work the land, to read ledgers, to be a steward rather than just an owner. "My grandfather died 3 years ago," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "He left me the ranch. It was profitable, the books show that clearly. We had contracts with the railroad for beef. We employed 6 full-time hands. We were doing well. Then what happened?" Wells asked. 6 months ago, men came to the ranch. They said they were surveyors working for Cord Vance. They claimed our deed was invalid, that the land had never been properly filed. They gave me 30 days to vacate. What did you do? I went to the county seat, showed them my grandfather's deed, but they said Mr. Vance's documents superseded ours. When I tried to hire a lawyer, I found that every attorney in 3 counties had already been retained by Vance Holdings' conflict of interest prevented them from representing me. Grace's voice hardened. Then men came to the ranch at night. They didn't hurt me, but they made it clear what would happen if I kept fighting. Accidents happen to women alone on remote ranches. Bodies disappear in the mountains. More murmurs from the gallery. Judge Morrison's expression was thunder. So you fled, Wells said. Yes. I took what I could carry and ran. I thought if I could get to Helena, find work, save enough for a lawyer willing to take on Vance. Grace shook her head. I didn't plan very well. I nearly froze to death in a Christmas blizzard before Mr. Brennan found me. And Mr. Vance tracked you down. His men did. They asked around town, found out where I was staying. Then Sheriff Dawes arrived with fabricated charges of trespassing and theft on my own property. Wells nodded, then turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to call additional witnesses. We have 3 other ranchers with nearly identical stories of Mr. Vance using questionable documents and intimidation tactics to acquire their land. Objection. Cross was on his feet. This hearing is about Miss Hartley's specific case. Pattern evidence is admissible in fraud cases. Judge Morrison said, I'll allow it, but keep it brief. Miss Wells? Over the next hour, 3 weathered ranchers took the stand. Each told similar stories, Vance appearing with documents that challenged their deeds. County officials siding with Vance despite evidence to the contrary. Threats veiled and explicit. One man's barn had mysteriously burned. Another's cattle had been poisoned. The third had simply given up and sold his land to Vance for a fraction of its worth. I was tired of fighting, the man said. Tired of watching my back. Figured it was better to take what little he offered than end up dead. By the time the last witness stepped down, the courtroom was silent with suppressed rage. Grace could see it on face after face, the realization that Vance had been stealing from their neighbors, their friends, threatening the fabric of their community. Judge Morrison looked at Vance. Mr. Vance, do you wish to testify? Vance stood, smoothing his coat. Your Honor, I'm a businessman. I acquire property through legal channels. If there were irregularities with documentation, I was unaware. My attorneys handle such details. Convenient. Catherine Wells said, Your Honor, we have one more witness. I call Marcus Brennan. Grace's head snapped toward Marcus. They hadn't discussed this. He stood, walked to the witness stand with steady purpose, was sworn in. Mr. Brennan, Wells said, you're a successful businessman yourself, correct? I am railroad investments, primarily. And you know Cord Vance professionally. I've met him at various business functions. We're not friends. Marcus's gaze found Vance across the courtroom. In fact, I've made it my business these past weeks to investigate his operations thoroughly. I have resources Mr. Vance assumed I wouldn't use. What did you discover? That Vance Holdings has acquired 37 properties in Montana Territory over the past 5 years. Of those 37, 23 involved disputed deeds that were resolved in Vance's favor by Judge Harrison. The statistical improbability of that pattern is... Marcus paused. Let's just say it suggests something other than legal coincidence. Objection. Cross stood. This is speculation. I have documentation, Marcus said calmly. Bank transfers, property records, testimony from clerks and surveyors who were pressured to falsify reports. I've spent $75,000 in the past week acquiring this information. It's thorough, it's damning, and it's all verified. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked like thunder. Order, I will have order. When silence returned, Judge Morrison looked at Marcus. Mr. Brennan, You're willing to submit all this evidence? I am, Your Honor, along with my personal guarantee that I will fund a full investigation into Vance Holdings and Judge Harrison's activities. Marcus's voice was iron. Miss Hartley is the woman I intend to marry. She's part of my family, and I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure she receives justice. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Judge Morrison turned to Vance. Mr. Vance, I'm inclined to rule that there is substantial evidence of fraud. Do you have anything to say before I make my preliminary determination? Vance stood slowly. For the first time, his composure cracked. Your Honor, this is a conspiracy against a legitimate businessman. Marcus Brennan is romantically involved with the plaintiff. Of course, he's making accusations. Miss Hartley is a woman alone who couldn't manage her property and is looking for someone to blame. I'll tell you what I see, Judge Morrison interrupted, her voice cutting. I see a man who has systematically stolen land from hard-working people. I see corruption of county officials. I see intimidation and threats. She leaned forward. And I see it ending today. She brought her gavel down. I find sufficient cause for a full criminal trial on charges of fraud, corruption, and witness intimidation. Furthermore, I'm issuing an immediate injunction preventing Mr. Vance from taking any action regarding disputed properties until this matter is resolved. The Double R Ranch is hereby returned to Grace Hartley's control, effective immediately. The courtroom exploded in applause and shouts. Grace gripped the witness stand railing, barely believing what she was hearing. Judge Morrison wasn't finished. Mr. Vance, you will surrender any documents relating to the Double R to Miss Hartley's attorney. You will cease all contact with Miss Hartley and the Brennan family. You will make yourself available for a federal investigation. And if I find out you've tried to intimidate any witness or plaintiff, I will personally ensure you spend the next decade in federal prison. Am I clear? Vance's face was ashen. Yes, Your Honor. Good, bailiff. Please escort Mr. Vance from my courtroom. As Vance was led out, he passed Grace's table. For one moment their eyes met. His held impotent rage. Hers held victory, the moment the doors closed behind him. The courtroom erupted again. People surged forward, ranchers shaking Grace's hand, townspeople congratulating her, the newspaper editor scribbling furiously. Catherine Wells smiled. Well done, Miss Hartley. You were exactly what we needed, honest, clear, compelling. But Grace barely heard her. She was looking for Marcus, pushing through the crowd, when she found him. She threw her arms around his neck and he lifted her off her feet, holding her tight. You did it, he said against her hair. You stood up and fought and won. We did it, Grace corrected. I couldn't have Marcus. $75,000. Cheap at twice the price. He set her down, framed her face with his hands. You're free, Grace. The ranch is yours. Vance is finished. Because of you. Because of us. He kissed her, brief and fierce, then pulled back with a grin. Now let's go home. Emma's waiting to hear the news, and Mrs. Calloway promised a celebration dinner. Home. The word had weight now. Substance. It wasn't just the Brennan estate or the Double R Ranch. It was wherever they were together, on the courthouse steps. Grace paused to look back. Through the windows, she could see Judge Morrison still inside, speaking with Catherine Wells. The territorial marshal was there too, beginning the investigation into Judge Harrison. Justice, Grace thought. Real justice. Not perfect, not complete. Vance would likely spend years in legal battles, might even find ways to avoid the worst consequences. But his power was broken, his pattern of theft exposed. And she had her ranch back. Marcus took her hand. What are you thinking? That my grandfather would be proud. Grace squeezed his fingers. He always said the land remembers those who love it. I think people work the same way. You loved me enough to fight when I couldn't fight for myself. That's That's everything. You fought too. You testified, told the truth. Didn't give up even when Vance tried to break you. Marcus pulled her close. We make a good team. Grace Hartley. But soon to be Grace Brennan, she asked, half teasing, half hoping. If you'll have me? His expression grew serious. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other 3 weeks. But Grace, I've never been more certain of anything. Will you marry me? Be Emma's mother, my wife, my partner in everything. Grace felt joy bloom in her chest. Warm and certain. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The kiss they shared on the courthouse steps was witnessed by half the town, and Grace didn't care. Let them see. Let them know that broken people could heal each other, that courage could triumph over corruption, that love could grow even in the coldest winter. They broke apart, both grinning. And Grace noticed Marshal Tom approaching with a leather folder. Miss Hartley, these are the official documents returning the R to your name. You'll want to file them with the land office, but as of this moment, it's legally yours again. But Grace took the folder with trembling hands. Inside was her grandfather's original deed, stamped and certified, alongside a court order invalidating Vance's claim. Thank you, Marshal, for everything. Thank Judge Morrison and your stubborn refusal to give up. Tom tipped his hat. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a corrupt county sheriff to go arrest. After he left, Grace stood holding the deed, feeling its weight, her grandfather's legacy, her family's land, her future. Want to ride out there? Marcus asked. See the ranch. Grace looked up at him, this man who'd saved her life twice. First from a blizzard and then from despair. Who'd stood beside her when she was at her lowest. Who'd fought for her when she was ready to give up. I want to go home, she said. To Emma. The ranch can wait. Right now. I just want to be with my family. Marcus's smile could have lit the darkest night. Then let's go home. They walked together toward the waiting buckboard, hand in hand, surrounded by well-wishers and friends. The January sun was bright and cold, the sky impossibly blue, the snow sparkling like diamonds scattered across the earth. Behind them, the courthouse stood as a monument to justice served. Ahead, a future stretched full of promise and possibility. Grace Hartley had lost everything and found it again. Transformed. She'd lost a ranch and gained a family. She'd lost her way and found herself. She'd faced the darkness and emerged into light. And as they drove through Helena's streets toward home, toward Emma, toward the life they would build together, Grace knew with absolute certainty that every moment of pain, every day of running, every night of fear had led her exactly where she needed to be. Home, where the heart settles spring came to Montana territory with a gentleness that felt like benediction. Grace stood on the porch of the R ranch house, watching the sun rise over mountains still capped with snow, and breathed in air that smelled of sage and new grass and possibility. 3 months. 3 months since the hearing, since Vance's empire had crumbled, since Judge Morrison's ruling had changed everything. It felt like a lifetime and a heartbeat all at once. Behind her, the ranch house door opened. Marcus appeared with 2 tin cups of coffee, steam curling in the cool morning air. He'd stayed the night properly, in the guest room helping her and the newly hired ranch hands mend the south fence line until well past dark. Couldn't sleep, he asked, handing her a cup. Didn't want to miss this. Grace gestured at the landscape coming alive with dawn light. My grandfather used to say sunrise over the R was God's way of promising that yesterday's troubles didn't have to be tomorrow's. I'd forgotten how true that was. Marcus moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. The place looks good. Grace. Really good. It did. The past months had been a whirlwind of work repairing buildings, replacing stolen equipment, rehiring hands who'd scattered when Vance took over. Marcus had helped with everything, splitting his time between his own ranch and hers. bringing Clem to oversee major repairs, throwing money at problems that could be solved with money and labor at those that couldn't. But the real work had been Grace's. Learning to be the owner her grandfather had trained her to be, making decisions about stock and feed and water rights, earning the respect of men twice her age who weren't sure a woman could run a spread this size. She'd proved them wrong. The Double R was thriving again. "I got a telegram yesterday," Marcus said, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. "From Catherine Wells. Vance's trial starts next month. Federal charges. Multiple counts of fraud. She thinks he'll get 10 years minimum." Grace was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Not because I want revenge, I don't. Not anymore. But because other people deserve justice too. All those ranchers he stole from, they deserve to know the law actually works. You made that possible. By standing up, by testifying, we made it possible." Grace turned to face him. "Marcus, I've been thinking about us, about the wedding." His expression grew cautious. "Having second thoughts." "God, no, the opposite." She set down her coffee cup, took his hands. "I want to get married here, on the Double R, with Emma and Mrs. Calloway and Clem and all the hands. Small and simple and real, not some big society affair in Helena." Marcus's face split into a grin. "You sure Mrs. Henley's been planning what she considers appropriate for a Brennan wedding? She's mentioned a 6-tier cake at least 3 times. Let her bake 6 cakes if she wants. We'll have them at the reception, but the ceremony itself." Grace looked around at the land her grandfather had built, the home she'd reclaimed. "This is where I need to say my vows, where my family started, where our family will grow." "Our family?" Marcus pulled her close, rested his forehead against hers. "I like the sound of that. So do I." Grace closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of sun on her back, the solid presence of the man she loved. "So when can we do this? I'm tired of sleeping in separate houses." Marcus laughed, the sound rich and free. "How about Saturday? Give us 4 days to get ready. I'll wire Emma and Mrs. Calloway in Denver. They've been itching to come home anyway. We'll get the circuit preacher, set up in the barn if the weather turns." "Perfect." Grace kissed him, quick and sure. "Let's do it." Saturday dawned clear and warm, the kind of spring day that felt like a gift. Grace woke early in her own bed for the last time as Grace Hartley alone and lay watching light filter. Through the curtains her mother had sewn 40 years ago. A knock at her door. "Miss Grace, it's me." Emma burst in before Grace could answer, followed more sedately by Mrs. Calloway. The girl launched herself onto the bed, all flying braids and barely contained excitement. "You're getting married today. You're really, truly getting married and becoming my mama for real." Grace pulled Emma into a hug, breathing in the scent of soap and child joy. "I'm really, truly becoming your mama. And you won't change your mind. Promise." "I promise, sweetheart. Nothing could make me change my mind." Mrs. Calloway set a tray on the dresser. Coffee, toast, preserves. "Now then, Miss Emma, let Miss Grace eat something before we start getting her ready. Can't have a bride fainting at her own wedding." Over breakfast, the 3 of them talked and laughed and planned the day. Mrs. Calloway had brought Grace's wedding dress from Helena, simple cream muslin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, nothing fancy but beautiful in its simplicity. Emma had picked wildflowers that morning, purple lupine and Indian paintbrush. Enough for a bridal bouquet and decorations for the makeshift altar Clem had built in the ranch yard. "Papa's been pacing since dawn," Emma reported, stealing a bite of Grace's toast. "Clem says he's never seen the boss this nervous." "Your father's nervous." Grace raised an eyebrow. "He thinks you're too good for him." Mrs. Calloway began unpinning Grace's nighttime braid. "Told me last night he couldn't believe someone as strong as you would choose someone as emotionally broken as him." His words. Grace felt her throat tighten. "He said that men can be fools even when they're brilliant. Mrs. Calloway's hands were gentle, working through Grace's hair with a brush. But he loves you something fierce, and that girl loves you. You're healing each other, all three of you. We are, Grace agreed quietly. I didn't think I'd ever have a family again. Thought I'd spend my life alone on this ranch, growing old with just the cattle and my memories. Then a Christmas blizzard brought me to Marcus's door. God works in mysterious ways, Mrs. Calloway said, and sometimes through terrible weather. Emma giggled. Grace found herself laughing too, the sound mixing with the bird song outside the window and the distant sound of men setting up chairs in the yard. This was happiness, simple, ordinary, extraordinary happiness. The ceremony took place at 3 o'clock, with the sun warm and the breeze gentle and the mountains standing witness in the distance. Grace walked from the ranch house to the makeshift altar alone. No one to give her away, because she belonged to herself, was choosing this freely. But as she walked, she felt her grandfather's presence, felt her parents watching, felt all the generations of Hartleys who'd loved this land bearing witness to this moment. Marcus waited at the altar, dressed in his best suit, with Clem standing beside him as best man. And there was Emma, practically vibrating with excitement in her new pink dress, holding the ring pillow like it contained the crown jewels. When Grace reached Marcus, he took her hands and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. You look beautiful, he whispered. You look terrified, she whispered back. Terrified I'll wake up and this will be a dream. The circuit preacher cleared his throat, smiling. Shall we begin? The ceremony was simple. Traditional vows with one addition. Emma stood between them when they exchanged rings, and they each made promises to her too. Marcus vowed to be the father she deserved. Grace vowed to love and protect her, and Emma, in her clear child's voice, vowed to be the best daughter ever, and not complain too much about chores. The gathered crowd laughed. Someone in the back, probably one of the ranch hands, shouted, "That'll last a week." When the preacher finally said, "You may kiss your bride," Marcus pulled Grace close and kissed her thoroughly enough that Emma made exaggerated gagging sounds, and the crowd whooped and hollered. Grace broke the kiss laughing, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Hello, Mrs. Brennan," Marcus said against her lips. "Hello, husband." Emma threw her arms around both their legs. "We're a family now, a real family." Marcus scooped her up, kept one arm around Grace. "We've been a real family for months, sweetheart. Now it's just official." The reception lasted until well after dark. Mrs. Henley had indeed baked 6 cakes. There was fiddle music and dancing, children running wild in the twilight, ranch hands from both spreads mixing and celebrating. At one point, Grace found herself dancing with Clem, who proved surprisingly light on his feet. "Take care of them," Clem said gruffly. "Boss and the little one. They need you." "I need them too," Grace replied. "That's what makes it work." "Reckon you're right." Clem spun her in a creditable turn. "And Miss Grace, your grandfather would be proud. You didn't just save the ranch, you brought it back to life." Later, as the party wound down and stars emerged in the darkening sky, Grace and Marcus slipped away to the barn. They stood in the doorway, watching their joined families celebrate, holding hands in comfortable silence. "I have something for you," Marcus said finally. He pulled a small leather folder from his coat pocket. "Wedding present." Grace opened it. Inside were legal documents, deed transfers, signed and notarized. She read them once, twice, not quite believing. "Marcus, this is... You're merging the Brennan Ranch with the Double R. Combining operations. 2 ranches. 1 family. Clem will manage day-to-day on both spreads, but you and I make decisions together." He turned to face her fully. "I don't want separate lives that we try to balance. Grace, I want one life, built together. Is that all right?" Grace looked at the man she'd married, wealthy, wounded, brave enough to risk his heart again, who'd seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway. Who'd fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself? Who was offering not just his name, but his complete partnership? It's more than all right. She stood on her toes and kissed him. It's perfect. They stood together in the barn doorway, surrounded by the sounds of celebration. The scent of spring grass and livestock and life through the open door. They could see Emma teaching the ranch hand's children some complicated game that involved a lot of running and shrieking. "Think we'll have more?" Marcus asked, nodding toward Emma. "Children, I mean," Grace rested her head on his shoulder. "I'd like that. Fill this house with noise and chaos and love." "Sounds terrible." Marcus's voice was warm with humor. "I can't wait." As the last of the guests began departing, as the hands headed back to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Calloway collected Emma for bed, Grace walked out to the porch one more time. Marcus followed, stood beside her as they looked out over the land. "You know what I was thinking about," Grace said. "That Christmas Eve, when I was stumbling through that blizzard, half frozen, convinced I was going to die alone. I remember thinking that at least I'd tried, that I'd fought for as long as I could before running, that my grandfather might forgive me for losing the ranch because at least I'd survived. And now I know I didn't lose anything. I just took a long route to find everything." She turned to Marcus, took both his hands. "You saved me that night, not just from freezing, from giving up. From believing I had to face everything alone, you gave me back my life, Marcus, my home, my family, myself." Marcus pulled her close, tucked her head under his chin. "You did the same for me, Grace. I was a ghost before you came, just existing, not living. Emma and I were trapped in grief and silence. You walked into our house and reminded us how to be alive, how to hope, how to love." They stood together as the last light faded from the sky and stars emerged, brilliant and countless. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, "Closer." In the barn, horses shifted and settled. The ranch breathed with life, the life Grace had reclaimed, the life she and Marcus would build together. "Time to go in," Marcus asked finally. Grace smiled. "Time to start our life." They walked inside together, hand in hand, husband and wife. Behind them, the Double R Ranch stretched away into darkness, but it wasn't dark. Not really. It was just waiting for dawn, and dawn always came. Inside, Emma was already asleep in her bed, one hand tucked under her cheek, the other clutching the wildflower bouquet she'd insisted on keeping. Grace pulled the quilt up over her daughter's shoulders, pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Sleep well, sweetheart," she whispered. "Your mama's here." Later, in her own room, their room now. Hers and Marcus's Grace stood at the window one last time. The view was the same one she'd seen every night of her childhood. Mountains and stars and endless sky. But everything else had changed. She'd lost this home and fought to reclaim it. Had lost her family and found a new one. Had lost herself in running and found herself in standing still. Marcus came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Grace leaned back against him, solid and warm and home. "That my grandfather was right. The land remembers those who love it, but so do people. So do families." She turned in his arms. "We're going to be so happy here. Marcus. All of us. I can feel it. I can too." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Welcome home, Mrs. Brennan." "Welcome home, Mr. Brennan." Outside, the stars wheeled slowly overhead. The wind carried the scent of sage and new grass across the Double R Ranch, and inside the ranch house, 3 people who'd each been alone had become a family. The blizzard was long past, spring had arrived, and Grace Hartley Brennan, standing in her grandfather's house with her husband's arms around her and her daughter sleeping down the hall, knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Home. Finally, completely, joyfully home.